I head up transformation and strategy for Wunderman Thompson. Wunderman Thompson is one of the largest agency networks in the world, about 4,000 people in APAC. And my role, I head up brand strategy, customer experience strategy, user experience. And then I have a strong degree of influence over our data and tech teams. And what I've put together today is a little bit of a view on what's driving transformation from a customer experience side of the world at the moment. And obviously, we've all seen a lot of change. We've all seen a lot of adoption. We continue to. And the one truth that I have maintained for a very long time, and as I think we all probably recognize it, is that expectations from a consumer are set by the last best experience you had. The moment one business does something amazing for you, you expect that every business should be able to do things equally well, and that's that. And as a result, you're starting to see a lot more demand coming. And I think the other side of things that I want to talk about is brand purpose, and how that is actually how those things are coming together to create to really create the potential, the transformative potential of service design and deliver on that. So obviously, some of these things are going to be quite basic. Brands grow by connecting with people. This is a function of reach, frequency, relevance. That kind of goes without saying. But the big element here is that we're seeing kind of, if you look at the marketing world, you're seeing a big evolution right now from promise to purpose. Promise obviously being what you say you can do for someone. And my position is that purpose is something very different than that when you look at it properly. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But obviously, brand purpose is something that is increasingly in vogue. Just a quick chart on Google Trend mentions to talk about how many people talk about brand purpose. But you get the idea, and I'm sure that within your existing businesses, this is something that you've discussed about. It wins awards. We don't need to get into that. Most important, businesses are starting to recognize the growth potential that comes with purpose. And this is just Unilever. They're probably the poster child, because they come out and actually talk about what they see as far as the revenue numbers associated with it. But this when you see numbers such as the fact that their purposeful brands are growing faster and driving greater contribution to the overall portfolio, you start to recognize the importance that exists behind this, and why they are upping their investment behind purpose. But I think the question then becomes, what does that really mean, right? And how do you get it wrong? And I always love little comics, and so I apologize. I just have to share little things like that, because that's just, they make me laugh. But it does point to how quickly things can go wrong in two ways, right? One, just recognizing that purpose, it's a word often used, but what is it? Every brand has a purpose to grow itself. If you look at what the Business Roundtable used to say in the United States, that purpose was, the purpose of a business was to drive shareholder returns to drive returns for shareholders. So was that the overall purpose? Now, the Business Roundtable in the US has made a big statement, and that is, of course, 181 of the Fortune 500 companies based in the US have come together and said, actually, purpose needs to be a bigger thing. It needs to be about employees. It needs to be about stakeholders. It needs to be about the communities in which we operate. The other element that I have on the right-hand side is a chart just showing the growth of green sector funds. And I've put it in for a really good reason, and that is that, without naming names and without trying to go into that, when you look at what these funds are, and you look at the funds that are listed, there is a huge, in what are called green funds, there is a huge amount of assets under management that sit within large mining institutions, large petrochemical companies, and some of which are genuinely, would be looked at as people that fit within a green sector, some of which wouldn't. And the point here is that there's a large amount that you can do when you start saying purpose, and you've got a world where people just trust you. But that's really the point. Is this really just talk, and where do we trust? And if we look at what we're starting to see, a world where information is freely available. We're starting to see a world where what you say isn't actually good enough, and that people are starting to recognize that trust is more about the actions you take than about the words that you give. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be perfect, because I don't think any company and I don't think any of us are perfect. But what it does mean to say is that if people are going to come out and say things, you're starting to see more incentive to actually put action behind that and to show how you actually do that. And this is where I think technology and kind of the transformative power that service design and technology has in terms of unlocking the ability to act on that purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 examples. One example within this is something where we did a lot of work helping the client. Others are where people that I actually know worked on it and helped them. But that isn't the point. The point is just to show that there are 3 really interesting examples that bring a couple different principles to light of what this actually means. But to succeed in it, you first need to think about how you would do that, right? And how do you grow from purpose? And the first element is, in my view, where I see brands that are really successful. The first element starts with internal alignment, and it starts with internal engagement and stakeholders. Before moving on to what that service design is going to look like, how you're going to implement technology and market amplification. The chart that you see goes counterclockwise deliberately, because so often the pressure within a business is actually to start when you've got anything new with looking at the market. But in actual fact, that, as counterintuitive as it is, if we talk about your purpose should come from yourself. Your purpose should be something that is internal and something that you really believe in. And for that reason, when we talk to clients and when we work through and do consultancy projects where we're helping organizations organize themselves to succeed in this way, we tend to focus on what the internal alignment is across stakeholders, across groups first, before we start looking at the other elements. And that helps to align priorities. That helps to give a good understanding of what assets are already in place and who can really help. And it also helps to expose what the insights are, what the business challenges are, what the business problems are. So when you get to this level of market amplification, you know that you're actually solving a real problem and not just putting words out into the market. So ultimately, that's where we start. But all of that obviously is about answering this one big question of why. And I'll go to the chart that everybody's actually seen so many times, which is the why, how, what chart. But when we think about that and we think about it, everybody has seen probably Simon Sinek's talk where he talks about why, how, what, and people buy your why, et cetera. I tend to think about that as purpose, mission, product. But when we think about where that comes from, and when we think about how we actually engage across that, it's really thinking about the internal side, the brand side, the stakeholder side, your business side first, then getting into the technology side. What are you going to do? How are you going to make that work? And how are you going to operationalize that so that you can deliver something to the consumer? And so that why, how, what is reflected in a number of different ways, right? It's reflected across purpose, mission, product. It's also reflected across internal, partner and technology layer, and consumer and product layer. But then when we think about it from a service design perspective, what it means is a couple things, right? So number one, and this sounds obvious from a service design layer, but you're going to see the differences in a moment. I talk about the fact a lot that one way to actually bring this to life and bring brand purpose to life is to look at how you translate your purpose into a service that consumers can actually access, right? So that means not just talking about it. That means doing something that people can see, but it means more than, typically speaking, that means to do this, it would mean more than giving to something that you believe in. It would mean making something accessible, right? And so this is an image from H&M. And H&M obviously is a large clothing manufacturer, best known for fast fashion. Fast fashion has a pretty terrible reputation in the world for the level of waste that is created and the level of disposability of their product. And yet H&M has at the core of their values a desire to be seen as sustainable and a desire to minimize the impact they have, right? And they launched a new service in their flagship store first, which was in Stockholm. And this is the top floor of their store. But ultimately, what you can do as a consumer is you can bring your clothes in, old clothes, and they'll shred them right in front of you. And your old clothes go into a machine, they get shredded right in front of you. They get respun into a brand new fabric, into a yarn effectively. And from that yarn, they then get knit by a giant machine into new garments. And you can pick the garment, you can pick the size, and you can pick the color, and you can wind up bringing in old clothes. They will shred them in front of you, and you will walk out with a new pair of jeans or a new jumper that's literally made from your old clothing. So they're taking your old product and turning it into something new in a very, very sustainable way. When we think about that from this, right, obviously you can see what their purpose was. It's deliver fast fashion at a quality price, but to do it in a way that's sustainable. What their mission is obviously make sustainable accessible. And when it comes from a technology product, that had to do, A, with the marketing technology, B, with the product they're putting into stores, C, with the scaling of that product, but most importantly, also with the user experience and the interface that people have as they come into the store, pick the product that they want something to get turned into, pick the colors. There's a whole bunch of service design that then get put into that. And then lastly, obviously, that is the product that people actually feel and what they get in that satisfying desire. I also tend to talk, when we talk about purpose and when we talk about growth, is that we need to understand, what are the measurement tactics that you can put in place if you're going to use new service design. And what we tend to help people with is thinking about how they would use Vision AI or other technologies to understand what impact that service has on a consumer. So an example of that might be, if you've built an app, can you get, when people use the app, can you turn on the webcam for a little bit to catch their facial reactions? And in exactly the way that Bevan was talking about, being able to see people's clicks, being able to screen record how people use a new service, but being able to watch their facial reactions for frustration, for points of happiness, for elements like that, or if it's just communication for where you lose their attention, these sorts of things. And obviously using machine learning and using some of the cloud technologies that are available, whether it's Azure or whether it's Google Cloud or whether it's AWS, there's all kinds of facial recognition technologies that'll tell you, that'll catch the little micro movements that we might not actually see in someone's expression. So you can actually catch the real emotional sentiment that people have. And those are the types of tools that you want to put in place in order to measure this, right? And with that, obviously you also want to measure, are you seeing a frequency of use change? Are you seeing that start to change? But the next element that we tend to talk about is being inclusive and making sure that your purpose is really felt by everyone and not just by the few. So this is degree antiperspirant, and this is a Unilever product. And when Unilever talks about this product, they talk about having a purpose, which is enabling movement and giving people the confidence to move, right? And that's a great purpose, and that's something we should all be confident that we're not going to smell when we move, and we're going to be fine. And there's something to that, and that purpose is very much tied to the product, and you can understand exactly where it comes from. But what they looked at was the fact that recognized was there is a whole portion of culture and a whole portion of society that is actually left out of that. And so what they aimed to do was create the world's first adaptive deodorant, and so that was built with a diverse disability community in mind. And so they brought in the blind, they brought in the disabled, they brought in all aspects of this community in order to redesign what that product actually looked like. So they have changed the handles, they have changed the opening features of it so that it's magnetic and you can easily pull it down. They've changed the handle so you can see how the hook is, so that you don't need to untwist it. You can just pull it straight down and have it that way. They've added Braille to the whole thing. They've thought about this from a whole number of angles in order to make sure that their product really looked that way. And the way they tested that, and that's the really interesting part, is by bringing this community in, by using technology in order to actually bring that community in. And obviously you can see, again, how that starts to line up in that why, how, what framework that I've overly simplified things to, but I like overly simplifying things sometimes. And that's about, if their purpose is giving people the confidence to move, great. Or what was their mission? It was to find the people least likely or most likely to hold back, because the people who felt the least comfortable, that's the hardest problem to solve. And when it comes to service design, the interesting thing is, you know who your core audience is, but winning is often not about the core audience. The core audience gives you a certain amount of scale, but to scale beyond that, it's often about finding the periphery and finding the edge cases. And when you design for the edge cases, that tends to include the middle and the heart as well. And you tend to find that you wind up with better design, as is an honest truth. And lastly, obviously, you wind up with a product that's designed specifically to meet those needs, but actually it's a brilliant piece of design. And so when we talk about measurement tactics here, and this is specifically for a disenfranchised community, but ultimately, if we talk about edge case design as a general principle for service design and purpose, what you want to look at is how are you actually involving that edge case in the process? Because oftentimes design is done with hero audience in mind and not with the edge case. And so there's a mindset shift that needs to come in as far as you do that. You also need to start thinking about how the audience describes and how they start talking about the product and tone of voice. We use a bunch of AI to actually record people talking about product to understand tone of voice and emotion. I tend to believe that emotion is an amazingly telling thing as far as what you're getting right. When you bring people in and do testing, they tend to tell you what you want to hear. And the more you can actually capture emotion, the more you can start to read between the lines. Anyways, hopefully this gives you a good idea. But I think most important from a business perspective here is also, is the target audience, do they still use alternatives? Or are you starting to scale this with alternatives? There's a bunch of work that was done with different payment products, with different elements, where you start to see, are you creating top of wallet when you or top of decision when you start looking at these kinds of decisions, right? Like if you think about, and Bevan, you'll excuse me in talking about one of your competitors at the moment, but if you looked at, there was a piece of work that was done last year by MasterCard where they talked about inclusivity a lot, and yet what I don't know, and I genuinely don't know this, is did that impact a top of wallet decision? In this case, the question would be, is this community actually using the product that's designed for them? The last thing you want to be is just a piece of PR. You want to actually make sure that you're making a difference with that community. The other element to me around purpose, which I think is really interesting, is about service design and about the willingness to sacrifice for purpose. I said at the very beginning that to me, purpose is something that you're willing to act on. It's not just something that you say. If you only say it, you don't really believe it. It's a really convenient thing. It might be something that you prioritize, but if you're not willing to sacrifice for it, is it really a purpose? Is it really what sits at your core? I would argue that it doesn't. This is a piece of work that's really interesting. Probably not very commercial, but very interesting all the same. It's a piece of work that was done by Telenor, which is a Scandinavian telecom company, and this is a piece of work that they did in Pakistan. And they talk about their purpose. I don't know what they write about it, but when they talk about it, they talk about it as making sure that everyone's voice is clear and heard, which is a lovely purpose. And what they actually found was that in Pakistan, and they're not the lead brand in Pakistan, they're number two. But in Pakistan, what they found was that there is a whole segment of the audience or of the population that aren't able to register births. And the moment, because they might live in a more impoverished area, because they don't get born in a hospital because of all kinds of reasons, but births aren't getting registered. And the moment your birth certificate isn't on file, you have no access to any government services. You can't go to a hospital. You can't you're cut off from a huge number of things. And so what they did to activate that purpose was to make sure that that everyone's voice could be heard. And they created an app, which is a Telenor app, but was designed to allow people a marginalized population to be able to register births, which is a really interesting thing because it doesn't actually have to do with telco, but it does have to do with giving these people a voice and making them able to be heard properly by government. And what it connected was a bunch of different communities. So they built MAP, but they had to work with different communities within those poorer neighborhoods, work with the one doctor that happens to be there, because you can't have everyone just register births. You have to still have some authority. So they had to find authority figures and create a way of working with government in order to make this work. But it's a very interesting element that they had to build through in order to make that work, to give people a voice, to the mission being to amplify the most suppressed, but to do that through technology, to give them a way of actually recording that in a trusted manner, because this is all about trust. And then to create a service where ultimately that trust is trusted at a government level, and that trust is trusted at a community level. It's a really interesting element. And obviously, the interesting sides when we think about all the other elements that could come in. Another great example of doing this and making sacrifices. I grew up in Palo Alto, in California. There's a bank there called Bank of the West, and I spoke at the beginning of this about funds that might greenwash things. Bank of the West made an announcement years back that they were going to really focus on sustainable elements, and they did a massive cull of what they invested in and where they allocated funds, and they saw a 35% increase in business as a result, which is really interesting, because they didn't know what they would see, but they thought it was the right thing to do, and so they did see a commercial return. But the point here is that what they then saw and what they have seen is competitors emulating the action that they took. So when you talk about things like this, the question to ask yourself is, are the values that I'm putting in place, as the sacrifices that I make, actually delivering a value exchange for my end consumer? Are my competitors starting to emulate that? Where does that fit into someone's routine? The last thing that I think is hugely important is purpose is nothing if it's not scalable. And scalability only comes from your ability to commercialize things. So even though the last point that I talked about might not sound commercial, if everything you did wasn't commercial, your business is going to go under, and that doesn't make much sense. So the best, most purposeful service design are the things that are going to be commercialized. I put a picture of Salesforce in the background. They're a partner that we work with a lot, and they really impress me. They have a thing called their 111 promise, but for lack of a better word, they ask their employees to give 1% of their time to charity. They give 1% of their gross revenue to charity, and they give in one way or another 1% of product, but I'm not quite sure how that works. But the 1% of time from their employees for charity, their employees call me up and they say, hey, we've organized for us to do a charity day at this place. Do you want to come do a day of charity with us? And all of a sudden, as their partner, I'm doing a day with them, a full day where we're sitting hand in hand, we're doing charity work, but the business conversations that come out of it and the opportunities that we discover out of it are fantastic. And honestly, I think that while the intent might not be commercialized, they're definitely seeing commercial returns from getting into the field and doing charity work with their partners. So to me, that's hugely important. And what we can see is there's a bunch of research that says that this kind of thing works. So this is meaningful brand research, slightly different from purpose, but hey. But that starts to show that as this happens, you're starting to see an outperformance in the stock market. You're starting to see people drive greater share of wallet, and you're starting to see an increase in performance against broader KPIs by brands that have an employee engagement around purpose. So you're starting to see these things come to life. I want to be really clear on one thing. I've shared this about brand purpose. I don't think that means that you have to be green and that you have to be this. It just means that you have to care about something and that you have to put something first. This is not about saying that there are industries that would never be able to have purpose at their core. I think purpose can genuinely be, we want to make sure that we're taking care of the communities in which we operate. It is not a higher, you don't have to create these kind of lofty ambitions, but it is about being true to what you really say you're going to be, and putting that at the core. Overall, listen, those are the 4 points that I made, and to me, I think that the key here is that when we talk about promise is the start of a transformation. Purpose, because it's what you want to talk about. Purpose drives that transformation because it forces you to take action. And transformation, obviously, are the actions that you take internally to make that happen. and the actions that from your stakeholders. Anyways, that's that. So apologies for running a little bit long.